cut up the reverb. Gary tells me that the television people outside are student television, so you don't have to duck and weave. You know, that's it's only for some student assignment. We're going to start in about 5 minutes. Thank you. Wrote it myself. Alec's book has just come in from Nexus magazine, which has just published it, and Duncan Rhodes finally got the stum out and got it here in time. Alec will be signing copies after or any time, and have a look at it. Alec will be speaking to us. When is Alec speaking to us? Tomorrow at 3:30. But he's available for socializing anytime before that. And one or two others, and Thomas J. Brown, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks, Jonathan. We got a good crowd here today. Thanks for coming. As Jonathan said, I was the director of and editor at Borderland Sciences in the United States for 10 years, from 1985 to 1995, until I moved to New Zealand. So today what I'm going to do is, I'm not so much going to give a lecture as kind of roam around through a lot of very interesting and obtuse ideas and viewpoints that people have had. The modern UFO mystery is a great mystery, and a lot of people have different views on it. And I feel that in many ways the view's not complete until you have all the facts. And they say, true definition of a true paranoid is somebody who knows all the facts. So I'm not paranoid because I haven't figured it all out yet. But we're going to work on a bit of that today here. So everybody wants to take a seat, and we'll start up the slides. I'll try, sure. I got a lapel mic, but they couldn't figure out how to turn the thing up. Technical difficulties. Okay, well, yeah, I'm going to kill him as soon as everybody's still. Oh, thank you. So, you know, a lot of people look out to space and I'm trying to understand the UFO mystery, but I try to understand the Earth first. And here's a picture of the Earth from the moon. It's hard to tell if they made this one up or it's a real photo, but it looks like the Earth, so we'll accept it for now. But to really understand the Earth, now here's a piece of petrified wood from Arizona. This is painted desert, Chinle layer, they call it, in the upper Triassic. And interestingly enough, before it got petrified, somebody chopped on it with an axe. So what in the world was going on back then? And let's take a look here at the, focus this a bit. Our focus may be shot on this, but anyway, this is basically a geological column. We have down here, you know, the Cambrian, the Precambrian, which was supposedly before life, and then moved on up through the various ages, and up here is us on top, and Pleistocene period, where supposedly the ice ages happened, but of course they never happened. So a lot of this is wrong, but this is what's generally given. Now the Triassic period, which I just spoke about, was here in the Mesozoic era. This is around the period that the Thecodonts started branching off into the Saurischians and the Ornithischians. But I know you guys didn't come here to hear a geology lesson, so let's go on to UFOs. They may have been here, but we don't know. We might have killed them off and not know. See, everybody thinks aliens are going to look like people. They don't really understand that the universe is manifold. You know, there's billions of stars, billions of galaxies. Who really knows what's out there? You know, a lot of the modern UFO picture is based on what people think and want to think, rather than what's actually there. This is a picture of Meade Lane. He was the founder of Borderland Sciences in 1945, and in many ways he's the kind of the godfather of the whole UFO field, although little known. Well, first famous sighting of modern times, not counting the Foo Fighters of World War II, was the Kenneth Arnold sighting over Maury Island in Washington in 1947. But in 1946 there was a sighting in San Diego where Meade Lane lived, and this immediately made it into the Borderland publication of the time, Round Robin. And Meade Lane was into what's called mediumship, which these days is called channeling. But in those days, they weren't so much interested in the sugar-coated platitudes of today. They would go and argue with the mediums and talk to them about physics and try to figure things out. So they went and presented to this man, Mark Probert here, who was the medium they were dealing with back in the 40s. And they asked all the different controls that were coming through him about this UFO. And they said, well, it's basically people from the etheric worlds. The etheric worlds are opening up. And for 50 years, Borderland has probed this etheric side of the UFO. And here is Riley Crabb, who I know a lot of people here actually know because he lived in New Zealand for the last 10 years of his life. And he took over from Meade Lane and ran... I'll try, I was trying to focus it, but since I can't see, does that look better? Is that fine? Yeah, it's hard to tell from where I'm at here. So this is Riley Crabb. He ran it until 1985 when I took over, and Riley Crabb was a man that believed that to go into outer space, you also had to go into inner space, and he felt that by putting a human carcass into a tin can and catapulting it to the moon was going to forcibly drag that person's consciousness along a path on the tree of life, which would raise it and elevate that consciousness. Because Riley was basically one of the great metaphysical masters of the modern age, probably one of the best read people in the field. And here he's pointing to the only flying saucer that Otis T. Carr ever built. Now, I read some publications these days, and they talk about Otis Carr like he was a suppressed genius that had a UFO, and we used to see a little patent number up here, which you probably can't read because it's a little blurry. But Otis Carr was a con man, and Riley knew it. He didn't buy that stuff, and he just went out to look at this billboard for fun one day in the 70s. This is our Giant Rock Airport in the high desert of California, which Bruce Cathie is here, and he knows this place. He's been out there. This was run by a man named George Van Tassel, who was very well connected with Borderland in the 40s and 50s. And under this rock was a room where George Van Tassel started channeling, and a lot of people have heard of Ashtar. George Van Tassel was the first man that ever channeled Ashtar, but in those days he wasn't flying around with Jesus on a spacecraft. They were giving technical information, and very precise and usable technical information, which we'll get onto in a moment. What's interesting about this is there's this interesting force field up over here, which appeared on a lot of photographs out around this area, which people considered etheric UFOs. Now, Van Tassel supposedly met aliens out there, and my good friend Philo Farnsworth III, the son of the man who invented electronic television, he said, yeah, Van Tassel met a lot of people out there, but they weren't aliens, because Van Tassel was actually a secret test pilot for Howard Hughes, and Howard Hughes was using this airport for a lot of international intrigue and smuggling and things. But it was still a focus for a lot of UFO activity and big UFO conferences in the 50s. And some of the information given to Van Tassel was about how to build this building here, which is called the Integratron. And this building's built purely out of wood and wood pegs. There's no nails in it. And this information was given by the Space Brothers to Van Tassel, and this was going to be a giant rejuvenation machine, which never actually worked. It was never completed. We ran a Tesla lab there for several years in the 1980s, and we discovered at the time through mathematical analysis that it actually was a miniature condensed version of Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower for broadcasting electricity. And Bruce Cathie has also found out that this is on a major grid connection. And here we see another etheric UFO, which will penetrate that mystery in a bit. The thing about UFOs is they first really started showing up in modern times, like I say, the Foo Fighters of World War I or World War II. It was when they first developed radar. Here's Earth pre-radar, and then all of a sudden there's all this radar coming out all over the Earth, and they started showing up with what they call radar angels. And Army, Air Force, and the Air Force after that would scramble jets to go look at these radar angels, and there was nothing there, but yet the radars could see them. So there was something flying around, flocks of things that could not be seen and could move very fast, and had the same characteristics of what were eventually seen as UFOs and sighted doing the same thing. So there is a connection between them. And people say, why don't they land on the White House lawn? Well, here's in 1952, here's a drawing of a radar map where the UFOs actually did fly over Washington, over the White House, over the Capitol, And jets from Andrews Air Force Base didn't scramble. They just let them fly around. So the officials have known about UFOs for a long time and have either some complicity or are just not allowed to do much about it. Well, by the time they did, though, they didn't scramble right away, and by the time they did, the UFOs had all left the area. Here is Trevor Constable, who did a lot of early UFO work, and he was also the second man who channeled Ashtar Command after Van Tassel. He was a student of Van Tassel's and spent many years out at Giant Rock. And the information he got was on how to film the invisible UFOs using special optical techniques. But Trevor didn't stick with UFOs. He found channeling to be what he called a cul-de-sac. It got to the point where all he had was nonsense coming through and he couldn't shut it off, and it took him years to shut it off. And when he finally did shut it off, he came to great discoveries in weather engineering. He discovered the orgone energy of Wilhelm Reich. And these are some of the basic cloudbusters that Wilhelm Reich used for manipulating energy. I don't know if Leonard up in the booth there can focus that a little better for me. The focus here doesn't seem to have any difference. Here's a basic cloudbuster which moves the orgone energy through the sky. You can make clouds, you can break clouds. This work's been going on for 40 years. It's been proven over and over again. But here it shows a draw, which Trevor actually found out the energy is moving in reverse, which people who have studied etheric energy or Victor Schellberger's work would understand the reversal of that. I'm not going to get too into detail in any of these because I have a lot of slides to show here. And here's a basic orgone accumulator, which is basically metal on the outside, insulating material on the inside, wood or cellotex. It's a basic capacitor or condenser, but what's interesting, just as a solid-state device, it'll actually draw heat out of nothing, so it violates the second law of thermodynamics, which of course overturns quite a bit of modern physics. But so do a lot of other things. While Reich discovered that, it was also shown the etheric formative forces of Rudolf Steiner. Here's the warmth ether, the light ether, the chemical ether, and the life ether. And without going into too much detail, the motions of the chemical ether were found to be identical to the orgone energy and predicted about 10 years before Reich scientifically discovered the orgone energy. And here's Reich's diagram of orgone energy and how it moves the Earth around to different layers. And here's Steiner's diagram of how the etheric energies move the Earth. So we know that these energies are there. They're all vital part of life. And here's some more of the weather engineering equipment that they used. They used to use all these long tubes, but then they eventually found that just through simple geometric forms they could access the ethers. And down here is Irv Trent, a tireless worker also in the etheric energy field in California. Here's Bob McCullough with a batch of old cloudbusters before they advanced to small things. Bob McCullough, a longtime member of Borderland who passed away about a year ago, was Reich's chief assistant in his OROP desert, Orgone Operation Desert, where UFOs showed up. And here's the title page, which I don't know if we can read this here, but it says OROP Desert, Wilhelm Reich MD, Spaceships, DOR, and Drought. And DOR is deadly orgone radiation, which Reich felt the spaceships were putting off and causing desertification. Very interesting set of books for those that can track these down and look them up. And here's some rocks, except here spaceships and desert development. Reich believed that the spaceships actually caused desertification, and Bob McCullough, being a chemist, actually studied the whole chemistry of what they called melanor and orinor and orite, and this is just some of the rock that were damaged by the exhaust from UFOs. Now, in order to really understand the whole UFO situation and the etheric UFOs in Trevor Constable's photography, what we have to do is understand basic optics. Now, up on the top here we see basic spectrum. We see light coming through a little slit. See, there's the dark areas there, and there's the light area. So light coming through, everybody knows Newton's famous experiment. He discovered 7 colors come out of light. Well, Newton was wrong, unfortunately, because he only did half the experiment. If we run light around an object, we actually find we bring the slits together in a different way and we get a different spectrum, which goes yellow, red, magenta, violet, blue, with magenta in the center. See, because color is a border phenomenon. It only appears on borders. And you can forget about some of the crazy explanations I have for why light goes in there. They border on the nonsensical. But fundamentally, while the wavelength theory of light does hold up, you can also reverse all the equipment and come up with wavelengths for the opposite spectrum. So the whole concept of the electromagnetic spectrum is faulty. You know, it's an engineerable reality, but it's only half of the picture. And a lot of the modern viewpoints on UFOs, you know, the so-called you know, Bob Lazar story and things like that about the way they're engineering, you know, these more advanced technologies, they're all based on a linear view of this extending on into infinity, when in fact there's this whole other side and it's a circular phenomenon. And here's another way of looking at it. This is a color chart from a color healer named Dinshah Gadiali. And here we have red, yellow, green, blue, violet, and magenta. So we see the two borders here. Around here we have the regular spectrum, you know, red, yellow, green, blue, violet. But if we go this way, we have the reverse spectrum, yellow, red, magenta, violet, blue. According to Dinshah, green and magenta were the same color, but they rotated in opposite directions in the ether, which means they basically have the same wavelength, even though modern optical theory doesn't have this. Now I was at a conference, the Whole Life Expo in San Francisco in 1987, and I had some of these books out on the table on Goethe's theory of color. This man came by and says, oh, that stuff was disproven 300 years ago. And I said, how do you know? He said, well, I'm an optical scientist at Lawrence Livermore Lab. I said, hey, great, I got a prism here. You want to do some experiments? The guy turned all red and walked away, and his friend goes, that's funny, he didn't want to do that, you know. Because people have their beliefs and they don't really want to look beyond them. And the truth is more to the way that color and energies work than is in the modern physics books. And it's also interesting, too, that green rules the head and all the bodily functions, and magenta rules the heart and sexual functions and all the energy flows of the body. And here's a basic film. Up on top here we see, I'm sorry these aren't more in focus. Leonard, can you focus that up there if possible? I'm actually flipping this focus back and forth while I'm talking, but it's not doing anything here. I don't think so, obviously. It is on. But anyway, what we see, this is the optical wavelengths. We can just look in general, I can explain it. Here's what the eye picks up. Here's, you know, infrared on one side, ultraviolet on the other side. Here's infrared film. You know, it not only picks up in the infrared, but also picks up in the ultraviolet. And we know, just going back to here, you know, if we bring these slits together, the red and the violet, we get the magenta, we get the reverse side. And it was using infrared film, is how Trevor Constable filmed all these etheric UFOs. Here's one of the early ones that he took a picture of, you know, using the information that he channeled back in those days. We call them critters. They look like biological entities. There's actually thousands of pictures of these. People say, oh, they're film faults. You know, I've heard all that. I have a lot of friends. Richard Toronto duplicated many of these photographs. And to the point where in Vallejo, California, he filmed a flock of them that came out on 3 separate frames. And interestingly enough, they were flying over a graveyard at the time. Here's another one that appeared over
That's not doing anything.
some power lines. They appear around energy sources. Here's some clips out of a film. You know, people say, well, it's just, you know, Mars on the film, but on this actual film you can see them actually dancing around Trevor as he does a occult exercise out in the desert called the star exercise, used for aligning and attuning to the Earth's magnetic fields. It seems like we've gone more.
No, can't do it. And he's doing it from down there. Maybe I use something similar.
But this was actually a blow-up. Yeah, I can't do anything about it while I'm up here. Somebody's going to have to deal with that. Okay, they got the light on up there. Thank you. This was actually on a... Okay, there we go. I think they're getting it now. Right. I think it's about as close as we can get there. Almost there, then they lost it again.
There we go. Is it going any well? No, it's just a matter of...
Well, this was on actually, this is a small clip off a larger photo where a sports writer was taking a photo of some hunters out in the field in Utah, and this actually just showed up on the film. And it looks just like all these other UFOs. Sometimes they do show up on regular film, but usually on infrared film, which is especially done. And here's one that showed up. This was right after Jimmy Carter signed the Panama Canal Treaty and was taking off in his helicopter. And this was just a regular news photo that somebody took. And this interesting UFO again showed up. So they've shown up in a lot of places, and in the Borderland files we have literally hundreds and hundreds of these photos. This work was all duplicated by a man in Italy named Luciano Bocconi independently before he even found out about Trevor, and their work independently corroborated each other's. And this here is a UFO that was filmed by a Marine Corps pilot over Korea during the Korean so-called war. And it is interesting because the films we looked at last night, they were shot over Mexico. You know, how sometimes, you know, when it was light out, we would get the darkness underneath, and then they would reverse and you could see light. Well, here we see that, you know, darkness again. It's characteristic of a lot of authentic UFO. And that's basically orgone energy. It's, you know, it's positive to light, so you actually get black. It takes a while to actually think about that, but you will notice. All right, thank you. That was tough, huh? And also, too, like I said, these critters showed up around a lot of energetic work, and here we see one appearing by a cloudbuster, which was being used for weather engineering out in the desert. And I did a book with Trevor. It took me 4 years to put together, called Luma the Future, which covers, you know, 30 years of weather engineering work that they did for people interested in pursuing that. Here is a picture of the sun in X-ray wavelength. Over here is in the hydrogen alpha filter, and this is in basic X-ray. The reason I brought this up is just to remind me to talk to you about light in space. Knowing how atmospheric color worked, basically, I called up NASA back about 1986 and asked them, what's the dominant spectra in the optical wavelengths of the sun in outer space? And after getting shuttled around between Cape Canaveral and Washington, D.C., and people going, why do you want to know? I say, well, I'm director of a research foundation. We're doing a project in atmospheric color. I'd just like to know. And we want to reproduce the experiment, so we really need to know the dominant spectra. And that led me into a very murky investigation in NASA where I couldn't get a straight answer. Of course, everybody knows NASA stands for never a straight answer, and and I'll tell you, that's true. We're trying to find out what these guys are up to. What's interesting is all the photos of the sun taken are all taken through hydrogen alpha absorption band wavelength. Now here, this is the absorption bands. They're the black lines. So when you do a spectrum and you get these black lines, those are the ones they actually film through, are the black lines where you don't see anything. Now what I found is, I was trying to get white light photos in outer space of primary and secondary light sources, you know, planets and suns and stars. And I found that there are no photos of stars from outer space. NASA doesn't have any in their catalog. They absolutely don't exist. There are no white light photos of the sun taken in outer space. There's actually no photos taken in hydrogen alpha filters in outer space. Those are all from the Earth. All you get from space is computerized enhancements and things. And what they're coming up with these days, I'm not really sure, because I haven't really been into that end of it for about 10 years. So I'm probably a little behind. I think Stan Deo has some really good updates on that. I saw some of his preliminary videos, so we'll probably learn more as the conference progresses. But what I did find in white light, I did find some white light photos from space, other than the astronauts and stuff, which we're not sure if those are real or not. But the coronagraphs, the corona of the sun, which they put up a blocker to block the sun's body, and then they have a polished metallic tube, and the corona reflects down there, and then they can read like different sunspots and, you know, flares and things off that. What's interesting is the spectrum of the corona. Here's the corona during an eclipse. The absorption lines turn to emission lines, showing that there is a definite polarity reversal between the actual sun and the corona. So there's a lot of mysteries with light in space, and as to whether or not you can see stars in space, every astronaut you talk to gives you a different story. I talked to one astronaut that told me, John Bartow, who was up on the first Challenger flight before they blew it up, and he told me, yeah, I told him what NASA told me, you couldn't see stars in space. I spoke to a man who had developed photographs for 30 years there, from Alan Shepard to Skylab, and John Bartow's telling me, he goes, that's funny. He says, no, he said, I could see the stars there brighter on space than they were on Earth. So I immediately called back my contact at Johnson Space Center in Houston, and I said, yeah, well, I just talked to an astronaut. He said, you can see the stars. He said, well, he said, the man's a trained observer, and he reported what he saw accurately, but the information we gave you was correct, which was that you can't see them. I go, great, okay. We'll move on from there. Here's a picture of some UFOs taken around the moon by George Adamski. Now, George Adamski is an interesting character we won't delve into too deeply, but a lot of people think he was a fraud. A lot of people think he was one of the great contactees. My point of view is he gave some very accurate information. He said that on the moon there's atmosphere, there's vegetation. People say, oh, this guy's nuts. Well, as it turns out, here's a picture of the crater Vitello, and over here, what do we see? We see clouds over the crater. And this isn't the only photo of the moon with clouds on, but it is one of the better ones. And here's an unnamed crater. And if we look really close, it might be hard to see here, but you can actually see little bushes all over. There actually is vegetation growing in this crater. And there are other photos of the moon showing vegetation. And here's a very famous shot of some sort of odd thing rolling along, making a stitch mark pattern across the moon. And there are smaller objects rolling around on here too. I'm having trouble seeing from my angle here, but if you look around, you can see that's the most dramatic one, and people have really noticed that really close. It looks actually like a little cylinder with a little arm coming out, and it has appeared on a number of other NASA photos too. Well, just look at the bottom photo here, and here's, of course, some more of the small rolling balls. There's definitely things, I guess this thing pops in and out of focus on its own. And these are the Blair Cuspids. I had a number of photos. This one looked very interesting. These are actually obelisks, which have been shown to have intelligent triangulation to them, which have been photographed on the moon. And basically, since the telescope's been discovered, there's been odd lights on the moon. Here's a basic chart of what's called transient lunar phenomena. And these just show different lights and different craters all over the moon. There's been over 1,500 well-recorded instances of this. The standard explanation is that they're moon outgassings and things, even though parades of lights have been seen moving across the moon, forming geometric forms. And very interesting. Here's crater Kepler. Forget about that arrow because it's supposed to show a raised platform there, which it kind of does. But here in crater Kepler, if you have an optical glass and can really look at this photograph close up, you can actually see very well constructed domes and antenna structures in there, and you see the walls of the crater have been ridged out to make platforms in there. Yeah, I have seen pyramid shadows and things being cast. I haven't seen really direct pyramids where it really looked like one as clear as the ones on Mars, but definitely a lot of pyramid shadows on the moon. And here's Kepler. Here is one crater we just looked at, and this is just a chart of transient lunar phenomenon showing some sightings in 1955. It's still going on today. This is standard astronomy. You can find this in sky and telescope and stuff, but their explanation will be slightly different than mine. And here's another one, crater Plato. And also there's another crater in this area called Lynn, L-I-N-N-E. And that crater actually changed shape. First it disappeared, then changed shape, and been a lot of moving and shifting craters on the moon. Here's the Apollo 15 landing zone down here, and here's another crater whose name I think this is Archimedes up here. Here's some more very interesting dome-like structures up in that crater. And Bully Eldest crater right here is more domes in there. Of course, with the optical sap in here, you probably can't see as clearly, but you can always go and a lot of these photos are in National Geographic. They're one of the best sources because they were the sponsors of NASA. The stitching on the bottom left is that's an arm off the antenna off the lunar photograph thing. Right, but you have to look really close. That's up in here. I mean, the thing is, some of this moon stuff, this is out of George Leonard's book, Somebody Else is on the Moon, and Well, in one sense, they'll look at all the stuff around here and they completely ignore these big things in the middle, just like, you know, Hoagland stuff. He shows like all this stuff that you really got to strain your eyes and blow up these tiny little blurry things, and there's like these glaring things just rolling around on the moon that everybody seems to miss. But what I've found, and I've been looking at lunar photos since I was a kid, is the more you look at them, the more you see, and eventually you'll see anything you want up there. And people do, too, believe me. But here's some things that are definitely up there. There's one of the things I'd like to learn, what he calls the X drones. You can see these little X's here working in these craters. And these things average between 1 and 3 miles long. And they've been seen working the edges of craters and in other places. They show up and they're pretty distinct. So there's some sort of giant machinery. What they are exactly, I don't know. Here's some drawings he's made from various photos just to show kind of how he's seen them laying around. He thinks they actually move around, that they're actually kind of like whip the Earth's surface to break it up for mining, which is very possible. There'd be giant things, you know, like I say, 3 miles long. And here, of course, it might be hard to see, but here's some of them. You can actually see smoke rising from them, you know, dust rising from where they're working in some of these places here. So there's definitely intelligent activity on the moon. Here's a rock wall on the moon that looks very much like rock walls I've seen in ancient sites around the world, from New Zealand to the deserts of America and elsewhere. Whether it's real or natural, it's hard to say. Here are, if you look really close, we'll have to squint here, but you can actually see bridges where these arrows are. There are actual bridges, and if you look real close, you can see them bridging a ridge along here. And these bridges are probably about 2 miles long and maybe a quarter mile wide. So even H.P. Wilkins, a British astronomer, has definitely seen bridges appear and disappear. And it was announced in the press in England in the 50s, but it never made to the U.S. In the U.S. press, they said they were natural formations. Pardon? It did make it into Canada, okay. And this is Wilkins' drawing of Gescendi Crater, which has been the source of a lot of transient lunar phenomena, a lot of strange lights moving around. It looks very interesting. And people say, well, how come, you know, we got all these big telescopes on Earth here, you know, we even have the Hubble. How come they just don't, like, put it on the moon and check these places out? But actually, George Mantassel, who we spoke about earlier from Giant Rock Airport, he did get this photo from somebody in Europe, which actually came from Mount Palomar, which was just down the road from Van Tassel. He had to get through a rather circuitous route. But this is Gescendi Crater, and it looks as though there's definite signs of intelligent building and stuff in here. You know, roadways or tunnels that things go through. That one I actually went along crack in the book, but we can see. Oh, yeah. I'm used to looking all these straight down with little optical glasses seeing from the side on a blurry screen. Changes your perspective, I find. And here's Hygnus region, and what we'll see is there's basically, this is in the 1880s, I think it was 1882, and here we see, you know, a couple craters here, which actually disappeared here, and some new ones showed up, and this was over a 24-hour period. And that's just an example. There's quite a bit of shifting small craters on the moon, you know, things appearing and disappearing. This is Tsiolkovsky crater on the back of the moon, which many people actually believe to be a lake. And if you look real close on a good photo of this, you can actually see things that look like little dock lands and things across the edges of it. Of course, the standard theory is it's just a lava flow, but there's actually other lake-looking things on the back. And Lobachevsky crater here, this is a blow-up photo, but here we actually see a cloud coming over the rim here. And what I can't see too good, there's actually a big oval object sitting on the rim of the crater right there, too. So it's definitely life on the moon. There's definitely things moving around on the moon, but whether we went to the moon or not, I seriously doubt it. At least not in these tin cans that these guys were playing around with. This one never even went into space. This is Gemini 6A, and here we see this fiberglass antenna. And interestingly enough, this antenna is no good for frequencies in space. And there's no retractable well in here, so it wasn't used to push up when they landed. And besides which, it would have burned off in re-entry, as common sense would tell you. So this one never went to space, there's no doubt about that. It was just a dog and pony show. And this was the one after Gordon Cooper, and Gordon Cooper probably didn't go into space either because his capsule, remember, he lost power and it got cold. Of course, Skylab, when that lost power, remember it didn't lose power, but they couldn't put out their big solar panels properly, and it got hot, and it burned equipment, destroyed the food. But then Apollo 13, that went out, and that got cold, and it gets hot, gets cold, gets anything, just depends on what day they're telling you a story. Chances are they haven't really been up there too much and don't really know. Of course, here's a classic fake photo from the moon. Here we can see that no exhaust blast. I mean, they claim, that the reason the footprints were so clear was because there's no atmosphere and the dust cramped down and wouldn't blow up. But there's no heating. There's quite a bit of thrust coming out of these things supposedly to land it. If you actually really study this picture, you'll see that the thruster is off center. So if they did fire it, it's going to make things spin around and flip. No atmosphere, very harsh light conditions, so all shadows are going to be completely in shadow, but yet we find, little flags always lit up in shadow. And of course, we have fall off, here you are on the moon, but, the spotlight doesn't, cover the outer regions. And if you really start looking down to little pebbles and stuff, which we won't get into today, you'll find that the shadows actually go all different directions. Here's another one that, actually I was going to try and show some of these, actually shadows going different ways off of that little rock there, and again you can see just how clean these things are. No dust has come up at all, and you can see how very clearly the spotlight's just showing right there, and the rest of this is all fill light. This is obviously done in the studio. But what's interesting is here's another Apollo 12 shot. This other were Apollo 12. There's an Apollo 12 shot which a lot of people claim that was proof of an orgone field, because supposedly they were on the moon with no atmosphere, and when they keyed the RF mic, to broadcast, supposedly the auric field or the orgone field of the body energized and showed off like this. But if they were fake, who knows what this photo was? It's really hard to figure, because the whole thing is the cooling packs they were supposed to have in here was based on ejected water for cooling. So they're supposed to have these like kind of whale spouts blowing out to keep the thing cooled. And the man named Rene, who wrote the book NASA Mooned America, did the calculations and found out they couldn't really put enough water in there to cool the things off. And of course, we never saw anything spray out, which would have been, beautiful, photo opportunities. So it's another indication that they didn't go. But it's a curious photo because people thought it was proof of orgone field in an atmosphere. Here again, here's a supposed sun. Doesn't quite look like sun. It's hard to tell what that thing is up there. But here's these harsh shadows, completely dark, but yet, of course, the United States thing's all nice and lit up there. And don't want to forget who went up, which is interesting. They were actually going to put a United Nations thing on here, and the Liberty Lobby in America actually raised such a stink that they went and put the U.S. stuff on. It's a little-known aspect of it. More earmarks of fakery here. Of course, can't forget our advertiser. But what's interesting here, and we can't see it too good, this is Mount Hadley. In National Geographic, I couldn't find the photo to make a slide for this. I was really looking for it, because this again makes a complication like the orgone picture. On Mount Hadley, we see that giant rotating thing makes a stitch marks. Is actually coming down the mountain behind the lunar module here. So I'm half inclined to think that they send up robotic craft to shoot backgrounds and stuff, and then they put them in with this. So I actually think that they have sent craft to the moon, or they may have gone up in UFOs, secret technology, which they no doubt have. But these goofy guys, we don't even know who they are. They might not even be the people they told us. They could be some guys they hired off the street just to stand around in the studio. Who knows what in the world's going on. And another thing, too, is if you look, the shadows never... Yes, I am a bit. No, I am being flippant. Yes. Well, no, we don't know. I mean, who knows? They told us we went to the moon, It's obviously they're faking it. I could laugh or cry. I choose to laugh, But I respect your opinion. So, No, okay, I'm sorry, you're right. And I do have a lot of stuff to move through, but if you also look too, on a lot of these shadows, this shadow comes straight off, but down here it's going off. If you really study these photos, there's so many earmarks of fakery. Here's another one we call Mutt and Jeff, because this guy's got a really long shadow, and this guy's got a really short shadow, you know, Aldrich and Armstrong. They both have, you know, his shadow length, one's, you know, 3 inches, the other's 4.5 inches on the measurement, so they both had different light sources with fill. Here's an interesting one for a number of reasons, but the main thing we'll point out here is, of course, here's the dark shadow, and again, he's all filled in with light. But you notice the shadow actually reaches up to the point where the person's photographing, but here on the ground, his shadow doesn't go as far. And of course, you can see the way the light fill goes. It's all spotlights. Oh, okay, the shadow in the helmet goes much farther than the shadow in the ground. They don't match. I know, but you can actually see where the thing goes to. Is it actually goes up and is hitting the feet of the guy who's supposedly taking the pictures. They really don't match when you look. And another thing is, too, is they obviously filmed, where they filmed the guys jumping around, dancing and stuff, was a different shoot than this, because they never show these guys taking photos. And also, all the photos are also taken from an elevation about 8 to 10 feet above, because the angle is always down on top of them. It's never up from the proper thing where they're supposed to be shooting from chest angle. And you can say, well, maybe on this one he's standing on higher ground, but if you study all of them, you see that characteristic sign. And in many ways, you can actually see where the man's not even holding a camera. He's doing something else and just being reflected in there. Just that they don't match. Well, they use so many different light sources to fill. Let's look at this. I'm sorry we can't get the top of this, because up at the top of this really shows, on all of these photos, there's a little, the best little aspect of this is cut off, which we'll get to in a second, but here, you see these shadows go this way here, obviously. That shadow's going that way, but yet that shadow's going that way. You know, I mean, I'm not making that up. That's pretty clear. And this stuff's been gone over by professional photographers that point this out, but I'm sorry we can't see the top of this. It's cut off because the actual arm of this antenna thing coming up here, little crosshairs that they put on the picture, actually goes behind the antenna, which is, the only way they could have done that was by doctoring photos. There's no way in the world. Well, they sure would have had to haul off a lot of batteries up there, and it wasn't on any of the equipment lists or anything. Now, just think of, turn on your you know, headlight to your car and think of how much juice goes out of that if you leave them run. Look, think of the tremendous floodlights you would need. Now, why in the world they're going to be standing on the moon in the sun? Why are they going to bring up lights? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. The thing is, everybody wanted to believe. You know, I used to think, we never went to the moon. People thought that must be crazy. But once you really start looking, you know, and down here is actually a little C written into the rock, just like a little stage rock where they know where to set them up so they show up properly. And these have all been published in books. 40 in Times, the January-February issue, actually analyzes these quite in detail. Right.
Okay, now the rocks.
Okay, well, what about the crosshair being behind the antenna up there? Yeah, if Leonard can hear us, maybe you could tip that down for a moment up there, and we could take a look at that, because that's definitely, there's no doubt about it, the crosshair definitely goes behind. Okay, there we go. Let's see if we can focus it. There's the crosshair. Okay.
Oops.
Here we go. Here's the crosshair right there, and it stops right there. That little piece is in front of the antenna. There's no doubt. Right, it's on the plate, so how could it get... Well, I can show you this. You know, I can show you this. Yeah, no, it's, I'm just showing some of the examples. You go over all these photos, you find shadows going every which way on them. It's not, and I understand what you're saying about elevated ground, and I've thought about that, but if you really, yes? Yeah, they'd be on the right side, because they were made into the lensing of the camera. There's no way in the world it could get on the other side. And this is definitely, and of course there's other problems too, like the famous photo here, where the man is jumping up. There's the highest jump ever seen on the moon. Supposedly these guys are supposed to be able to jump 6 feet up, but they made the packs supposedly weigh about 300 pounds, so they couldn't. But what's interesting is, see, there's a camera here filming, and this flag here is at 90 degrees, but this camera, if you look at the actual footage of the camera, the flag angle's down. It's at a different angle. It was definitely done at a different time and different shoot. And there are other problems with this too. There's a very interesting little kind of like cable running along down in here. So I'm like you, Stan. I used to believe all this stuff's on the moon. I used to look at these photos and go, look, they're on the moon definitely, because definitely on Mount Hadley back here, I'm telling you, there's one of these big, rotating things coming down. So I've been led to believe that basically they've superimposed real backgrounds. Oh, absolutely. I'd be more than happy to get you that stuff. Yeah. Actually, there's a book coming out called The Whistleblowers, which is going to, it's an analysis of all of these done by a photographic expert. And that's supposed to be coming out sometime this year. David Percy, I think it was February 40 in Times, has a couple-page kind of teaser of it, which shows some of this stuff. Another thing is, too, is Bill Bryan in his book Moongate, Suppressed Findings of the NASA Space Program. He said that basically the lunar rover was designed for Earth gravity, and in moon gravity, 1/6 gravity would flip over. The center of gravity was all wrong. If it made any sharp turns, but of course they just drove that thing around and, taking fast turns and things. And also, supposedly the reason they made the footprints was because no atmosphere, dust couldn't fly. But what do we see? We see the dust flying off the wheels here. So there's quite a number of holes in NASA's story, and I'd be willing to bet dollars to donuts, as they say, that most of these photos are faked. Right. Well, that's another story. And the moon does have an atmosphere. We saw those photos with the. Well, that's what I believed for years, was that the moon basically had heavy gravity and an atmosphere, because gravity probably doesn't have anything to do with mass the way that the Newtonian physics says it does. So that was my contention, but once I really start studying these photos and stuff, they just look, they're all too well staged, and when you really start looking at the Hasselblad they had no viewfinder, no rangefinder, no light meter. These guys just supposedly had these things strapped on their chest, going around shooting this stuff, but yet every shot's perfectly framed, perfectly lighted, and when you look at the actual sequences of them, some of the stuff's actually out of sequence too. Well, it's interesting because they did do there's a lot of interesting data that came back from the moon. Now, some people think that moon rocks actually came from Antarctica. I think we know Soviets sent up robot craft. We know that they have technology far beyond these, goofy tin cans they were sending the guys up in. Which, of course, there's all these other problems, too, with radiation. These guys, they went to the moon. Some of these moon flights went during very heavy solar flare periods. Well, how come they got cold? See, that's the whole thing. How could they have gotten cold? If you put a tin can with a piece of glass over it out in the desert sun, it's going to get very hot inside, just like Skylab did. Skylab overheated because his sun shields didn't go out. But yet these guys out in space get cold. So do you get hot or do you get cold? If you ask NASA, they'll tell you neither. You can't. No, there's a lot to that. In fact, these guys would have received something like 25,000 times the dose of a nuclear worker. It's very possible, but if they did, these guys that they took pictures of probably weren't on them. And this is a very interesting Apollo 12 shot. This is an actual NASA photo. comes from Fred Steckling's book, We Discovered Alien Bases on the Moon. Now these have shown up. We saw some on the video last night. Is this a real shot? Was this a UFO on the moon? Was this one of their alternative stories? You know, well, maybe we discovered aliens. I'm sure, you know, the way the intelligence service works, they usually have 3 or 4 side stories ready to pop out in case one doesn't work. Just like Lee Harvey Oswald, they had the mob lined up behind him in case, you know, there wasn't a lone gunman. So maybe, you know, they were going to fake aliens. Maybe it was a real alien. I honestly don't know. And I appreciate a healthy skepticism on it. I used to be much more skeptical, but just the last year or two, I've just really really feel that these photos are fake. I just can't help but say what I think on it. But here's another one of these cigar-shaped things, which, and here's the moon of Phobos, and this was one of the last photos taken by a Russian ship to Phobos just before it disappeared off orbit. This thing came on, started showing up in the photos, and probably knocked it out. So these cigar-shaped things like we see here have been seen around and are known to be UFO shapes, but whether or not there was a real one like this one was, we don't know. I'd like to change gears a little bit here and just try to get a whole kind of world picture together. You know, most people kind of view the Earth kind of like, you know, the name of that dorky show they got now, Third Rock from the Sun. You know, as though the whole Earth is just this big kind of mass, everything, you know, cooled off, and we got this lump of rock that lightning started Proterozoic life and built up from. And a lot of people believe in ancient astronaut theories, and they go through all these ancient texts, and they pull out 1 or 2 little lines and go, yeah, that's proof that the astronauts were here. This is all, you know, we were brought from somewhere else, and all stuff was engineered. But what they failed to notice is what the body of all that ancient information was and what these people were saying. And basically, they were saying, as above, so below, the Hermetic texts. The solar body relates to your body in many ways, and it also relates to the metals, that, you know, like in alchemy, gold relates to the sun, silver to the moon, copper to Venus, iron to Mars. But this is more than mere academic or metaphysical meditation. This stuff has been proven scientifically over 40 years of experiments by Lilly Kolisko, who was a very significant student of Rudolf Steiner and was worked with the scientific mathematical section of the Goetheanum in Dornach, Switzerland. And what she did is she used a method called capillary, I believe you pronounce it here, dynamolysis. And basically she took here, this is silver nitrate, you know, the metallic salts, and this is a blotter paper which was rolled into a cylinder and set into a petri dish with an acidic solution of silver nitrate. In this case, she used all metallic salts, like I said, you know, tens of thousands of experiments over 4 decades. These particular ones here that I'm going to show you were done during a solar eclipse of 1927, I think it was June 29th. So basically, this is the fundamental characteristic of silver nitrate. During the day, they'll rise up and form a line. And of course, we all know the optical characteristics of silver. You know, they're used in it's used in photographs, you know, photographic work, you know, for imaging. So during the day, even if they're done in the dark, doesn't matter if it was done light or dark, they would only come up, form a line. But then in the evening, after the sun went down, these secondary images would rise up. And this is your characteristic Steig build, as they called it, of silver nitrate. And what you find is at different times you start getting patterns. This is actually a day before a solar eclipse, where the moon was moving in front of the sun, and this line's not really straight. We're starting to see a disruption of the silver forces here. Oh, it's probably maybe you know, 3 inches tall, something like that, by 2 inches. That was Russian, Cyrillic writing, as a Soviet. Okay, this is during the solar eclipse. The silver forces, you can see the moon forces, which is in front of the sun, completely took over. And I have a you know, complementary set of slides I'm not going to show because there's too much material. Gold chloride would not crystallize properly during the solar eclipse. And this was, like I say, this was done over 40 years. And was very well recorded, and these experiments were actually reproduced again by a man named Nick Kollerstrom, who's still living in England and is still reproducing these experiments. So, oh, definitely. These were German scientists. These were done very exactly, and in fact. No, these guys, they had their own mercury barometers. I don't know if you know much about the scientific section at the Goetheanum, but these were probably some of the most profound scientific minds of the 20th century, who most people don't know anything about because the stuff just really didn't fit the worldview and been kind of shuttled off. And most people think of Rudolf Steiner's work as kind of mystical Christianity, but and they don't really realize what's in it. So yeah, this stuff was done very, very precisely and measured. And plus there was, you know, dozens of control experiments going. I mean, they did thousands of experiments a day. They just literally, you know, had people working 24 hours a day changing these solutions and doing things. And this is anyway after this is the day after the eclipse, and we see the silver forces starting to come back, and then following on it would come out. And just to show that there's more to the moon, you know, moon and silver are related, and in, you know, metaphysics, you know, there's a lot more to it. And also here's from John Michel's book, City of Revelation. Here's just in you know, geometric reference. Here's the Earth is the big shaded one. Here's the moon is the small shaded one, and they geometrically form what's called the squared circle, an alchemical geometrical problem. Very interesting. They're perfectly fit together like this, and also out of it forms the Great Pyramid. So, you know, some people say that the moon's artificial. I think it very possibly is. You know, maybe a shaped big thing, but was shaped to a precise proportion to regulate life and things on Earth here. And you'll see an idea develop here, which I'm sure some of you guys are going to go, hey, wait, now I don't even want to hear about that. But I'm a geocentrist. You know, people say back in the old days, you know, people, they're crazy old dumb old people used to think the Earth was the center of the universe. Well, they're still around. And tell me what you think when I'm done, because we're going to look at some more information. I'll try to speed up because we have a lot to move through here. Okay, here's the pyramids. You know, we know the relationship between Earth and Moon and the pyramids. Now here's Orion and the Milky Way, and here's the pyramids of Giza and the Nile. Basically, all of Egypt was a reflection, as above, so below. That's what the Hermetic text, you know, basically Hermes thought. These, you know, people say ancient astronauts. I believe the gods were real, and that the universe is constructed differently than people generally think. So, you know, why would the astronauts come here from somewhere else and, you know, reproduce the sky on the ground here? These people had something else going on. And, of course, now we know that these so-called air shafts, which couldn't be air shafts because the ones out of the Queen Chamber didn't go completely through, are aligned to Sirius and Orion and some of the stars up in the north here. But they're aligned at 24, you know, they're aligned to the meridian at like 2450 BC. But the layout of the plains of Giza goes back to 10,500 BC. So what we find in the Pyramid of Giza is an 8,000-year cosmic cycle, which has to do with this region of the sky, which they call the Duat, which is the underworld, which, of course, they knew that they had to go through to attain immortality, just like the Tibetans do in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. They need to work their way through all these various god forms and energies to transform through the other side. Well, these people took it literally, and to me this is another nail in the coffin of the ancient astronaut theory, because why would they come here and be trying to get into this whole underworld based on the archetypal structure from Earth? It doesn't really make too much sense. Here's a patent by a man named William Kunkel, who actually did patent the Great Pyramid as a pump. It's this tremendous pump. It has great hydraulic properties, so we know the pyramid, whatever it is, all else, it has tremendous hydrodynamic properties. And of course, when we start to look at the how they built these, you know, here's the air shafts going up. These were very well engineered. This was no mean feat to do this. You know, we're talking, you know, master masons, you know, beyond what people can do today. Basically, we cannot duplicate the pyramids and the plains of Giza today with our technology. It's a well-known fact because people have gone and tried to job it out and find out what it would take to do, and you know, engineers and things have studied this. So these people had very precise reasons. We're looking at their technology. We just don't understand it because our technology breaks and stuff. You know, these people are onto something we don't really know. And here again, we look at the things coming up, and it's very interesting because these are pointing straight, which is to where they wanted to go, and these crossed over. So we can actually see that there is a technological aspect to this, and very well engineered. These things weren't by chance. They weren't air shafts, because if they wanted air shafts, it would have been so much easier to put in these very complex designs. And of course, the whole layout, all of Egypt was geodetically aligned, you know, to link up to this. So they were mirroring, you know, this was their gateway to the underworld, which was the overworld, because it was the stars. And of course, you know, they're Sirius. Supposedly, according to some occult traditions, our Earth system actually rotates around Sirius, you know, Sirius A and Sirius B, and we know that tribes like the Dogon tribe in Africa, you know, knew the rotational period of the white dwarf Sirius B, you know, a couple thousand years before it was discovered. So we can assume that the ancients did have a vast knowledge far beyond ours, which we only have remnants, and unfortunately most of what we try to understand of it these days we're putting into our terms, like ancient astronauts and things, and I think we're missing the grander point of it all. Because also, you know, supposedly they say, well, there was giants in those days, and these ancient astronauts are supposedly different proportioned, and but of course all the Egyptian temples are built on the modern human proportions. So not only were they connected to the sky, they were connected to the earth geodetically, and they were connected to the human proportions. There's a man named Doug Benjamin who's actually done a study of all major Egyptian temples, and he claims that there's a mathematical problem where there's only so many, I believe it's 15 triangles which fit into a circle, different triangles. And each one of these triangles represents an acupuncture meridian and one of the major temples, and he can either neutralize, strengthen, or weaken your acupuncture meridians with these. So there's a whole sacred science built into Egypt that's connected. Doug Benjamin lives up in Michigan. I haven't seen him for years. And here was found in an Egyptian tomb a glider that actually works. And here in South America was a little gold jet plane that they found. So we're starting to see some of these ideas crossed over. And here's a keystone which was found in Egypt, where actually metal was poured into these things to seal them together on the megalithic blocks, which in itself is a mystery because they would have had to have portable metal smelters, which is pretty much beyond what we would ever consider their technology to be, and how would they have heated it. And here's one down at Tiwanaku, very similar sort of jointing. So this was probably global. Here is plains of Nazca, which many people say, well, yeah, it's a landing ramp for UFOs and stuff, which probably isn't true. But it's actually coming out now. This is actually a zodiac, a very unique zodiac of the Andes, and people are actually dating it now through ethnoastronomy and archeoastronomy, that these figures actually represent little dark places in the Milky Way. You have little dark spots, and all these different patterns on the plains of Nazca represent those. So here again we see that heaven's mirrored on the ground. You know, if it was just ancient astronauts coming, what are they going to sit here and do all this stuff for? And here we see, this is the beginning of the Mayan calendar, the Tzolk'in. And what we see here we have Leo, which I didn't talk about Leo too much, because that's the Sphinx is actually pointing to Leo in 10,500, the beginning time, which is beginning of half a precessional equinox in Egypt. But over in South America, here's the birth of Venus, the helical rising of Venus before dawn on 12th of August, 3114 BC. And this is the beginning of the Mayan calendar. And of course, then here's Orion and Sirius. So we have the whole duad again in the sky here, tied in with them. And here's the end of the Mayan calendar. Yes, most people have gotten it wrong. It's not the 22nd or 23rd. The Mayan calendar ends right on the winter solstice, when the sun conjuncts the galactic equator in the dark rift in Sagittarius that the Mayans called the birth canal of the human race. And it's actually overhead, it's high noon in Guatemala City. So the whole Mayan calendar, or Tzolk'in, is actually, again, the whole heavenly pattern worked into the earth. And here's Teotihuacan near Mexico City. And here we see how the actual layout of it actually represents the layout of the planets, with Neptune, Pluto, and another planet that hasn't been discovered yet, but they're pretty sure it's there because of problems with the orbit of Neptune. So again, you know, the whole of Mexico is actually archeoastronomical complexes too, heavens mirrored on Earth. And the ball courts, like are found in Mexico, actually go up into the United States. Here's Arizona, and these are ball court distributions to the state of Arizona. And I've been to most of these sites and investigated them. Again, there's astronomical alignments all over. And here's modern-day Phoenix, Arizona, which is actually a number of ancient cities there, 7 ancient cities there, which one writer, Richard Peterson, believes was the ancient cities of Cibola, which he thinks were wiped out by a comet about 1680. But that's another story here. But what's interesting is there's 600 miles of irrigation with excellent hydrological irrigation done in these canals here. But at the mouth of the canals, where they all come out, is a place where, again, is our astronomical observatory. Best we can tell, it marks the lunar cycles and the solar cycles. So, and we're finding, too, then south of here, Casa Grande, there's more. And it's just been discovered, too, that there's this whole meridian line. Oh, I'm sorry, that wasn't on this one. That's another site we're coming up to, which actually runs down to Mexico. Here's an alien from outer space, which travels along the holiday lines, the alignment lines. See, most of the ancient people, when they're when the spiritual beings or beings from other places showed up, they showed up on special holidays and special alignments. And to the Hopi, you know, like some of the Kachinas would show up like when the Pleiades was overhead from their kiva hole. And here's northwest New Mexico. These are the Chaco road systems, which the Chaco Canyon, this is Anasazi. Nobody knows who they are. Some people say, well, the Pueblo Indians are descendants of them, but there are some problems with that because of dating anomalies. But these roads, again, master surveyors and astronomers had to lay out some of these roads. And in Chaco Canyon proper, there are, here's where all the roads came into the north part of Chaco Canyon. This was called Pueblo Alto. And now there's a dozen major houses in here. Each one of these houses has 10 million cut sandstone blocks. 10 million is over a dozen, so we're talking over 100 million cut sandstone blocks here. This thing was 5 stories tall. Windows in the sides here are known to have solar, you know, equinox and solstice markings and stuff. Most of it's fallen down, so we don't know totally what they're doing. Also, there's a 250,000 cut trees. I don't know where they came from, but they're all cut perfectly, and as though they were cut with a saw. But supposedly, if you go there, they'll tell you that the naked natives ground them down with sandstone, which of course means they had to ground down 500,000 ends of giant trees, which is of course nonsense. And it was, they knew, and the Indians knew that this was going to fall because they had prayer things that were put behind, so they built it in a place that had to be there. And the whole thing is a vast astronomical complex. And here's some of the stonework. These guys were no slouches. They were master masons. So again, we have the heavens mirrored on the ground, and here's what the giant Kiva Rinconada there, which is of course named later. Nobody knows what their real names are, and here's a solstice marker on that. And for Hada Butte there, actually here's the solar and lunar calendar, a very complex calendar in the middle of the canyon. So the whole place was a giant observatory linking telluric and cosmic forces together. And here's Hovenweep Castle up on Utah-Colorado border, another Anasazi site. And here's solstice alignments again. It's another astronomical complex. And same site, here's a place they call a unit-type house. Because they say, oh, this is the average house of the Anasazi. But look at this incredibly fine stonework that these guys did. And again, here's the ground plan of that. And again, we find more alignments. I'm not going to go through these too much because I do want to move through a lot of this here. Here's a couple, here's the medicine wheel up in the Bighorn Mountains of Wyoming, and here's up in Saskatchewan. And these both have, these have been dated back, you know, well over 1,000 years. These are, again, cosmic calendars. But people say, oh yeah, they just did this to know when to plant. This thing's up 10,000 feet up in the hills. Snow only melts just before the summer solstice. And the thing is, you know, if all these things are calendars, you know, people were starved to death by the time they figured it out, how to build them and stuff. Obviously, the science was much more profound and this stuff was built out of it. They didn't need these complex calendars all over the world mirroring the heavens just to know when to stick a seed in the ground, because you don't stick a seed in according to the calendar. You know, farmers know that. They use the calendar to a certain extent, but it's still based on a lot of other factors. Here's the mound distribution in the states. People think, oh, Indian mounds, here's a few of them around. They cover 1 million square miles. And they follow a definite pattern from the shell mounds down here through all these different pyramidal type mounds and things up into the giant effigy mounds. Astronomical complexes throughout the entire lot. Hundreds of cubic miles of earth moved. Some of it from, I mean, I've been to mounds up here in Wisconsin that have layers made out of sand from Florida. Basically, somebody rearranged the eastern coast of the United States, and nobody ever found a shovel. And these mounds are very complex. Here's one, it's actually a hermetically sealed chamber with a body laying in water, which was still there until they opened it and broke the hermetic seal. These were very complex things tied in with a lot of alchemical symbolism, a lot of astronomical symbolism, a lot of bronze work, a lot of interesting things. Here's some of the metal work. This was lead, this was copper, this was silver. These, again, were copper, and these were all found during the Smithsonian Institute surveys, Squire and Davis, in the 1840s. And they remarked in their survey report that these were identical, virtually identical, these are their words as surveyors and engineers, to ones found in Egypt, but these were of much finer workmanship. But they were the identical size and shape and everything, measurements, but much finer workmanship. If you guys came here see aliens, here's some aliens. Look at that one there. These are effigy mounds up in Wisconsin. And what in the world were these people thinking when they were doing this? Because they went through a heck of a lot of trouble to make these. These things stretch out for miles and miles. And like I say, there's a quarter million miles. Actually, about 975,000 square miles, so almost 1 million square miles of mounds have been laid out there. Many of them now, so most of these aren't there. These have been discovered from infrared photography of the fields. And it's now found that a lot of these different things here are different astronomical angles, stellar risings and solstice risings and equinoxes. So the whole thing, we have a 1 million square mile complex here. And here's Cahokia Mound, a giant pyramid. The base of this is 16 acres, larger than the 13-acre base of the Great Pyramid. Again, here's Woodhenge, the side of it. This is sunrise on the summer solstice there. Another giant astronomical site. And this was found at the top. They call it the Birdman, but it looks like a woman because men don't have breasts like that. But I was at the site and the chief archaeologist was there. I was talking to him and one of his assistants, and they're going, "Oh yes, this is the Birdman." I said, "Yeah, it looks like a woman." They go, "We prefer to call it a Birdman." I said, "Okay, well we'll call it that as long as you guys are around here." But painted not far on the cliffs is this very mysterious design, which was there when the French first came up the river in the early 1700s, and of course there's a Thunderbird legend tied in with mysterious aerial sightings. So we could say, in a sense, this is a representative of the UFO view of the Native Americans that built these sites. Here's Poverty Point down in Louisiana, 50 times the volume of the Great Pyramid in these rows. This is like a couple miles here, but these here are precisely aligned to the summer and winter solstices. Why in the world are they doing that stuff? Here's down in Florida, shell mounds again. Why are they doing this? All these astronomical alignments. It wasn't just to know when to plant corn. They had a science that we don't know about. And here again is Mystery Hill in New Hampshire. Yeah, that was found in a mound. I'm not going to get too deep into this, but supposedly there's more mathematical analysis of this. This is actually, I'd love to get more into this, but we do have other speakers today. I want to move on. Here in Ohio, there's a number of these mounds like this. It's actually 1,080 feet on the sides, and it's been found that the Great Pyramid actually fits exactly inside of these things. With about a 2-foot variation, 2 to 3 foot variation. So here we see a link between the American mounds and the pyramids in the heavens, and here's some mathematics linking Stonehenge and the Great Pyramid. They're matched up through linking circles in what's called the vesica, which is, of course, archetypal shape of the UFO. And here is Stonehenge with its solar and lunar markings. It has an 18.6-year lunar cycle and the yearly solar cycle built into it. Definitely wasn't done for planting. They would have starved to death by the time they put that up. Where Troy once stood, everybody knows Schliemann found Troy over in Turkey. Well, he found a city, he found 6 of them, in fact, stacked up on top of each other, but once in Troy. If you really go through the information, Troy was actually in England, near Cambridge, the Gog-Magog Hills. So we can tie the Age of Heroes, so-called, is actually linked with all the megalithic stuff. Of course, there is megalithic stuff all over Greece and Turkey, but if you really get into this, which is another story, you will find that's true. And the Odyssey isn't just a story. The Odyssey is actually a star map to the Americas. And anybody who really wants to investigate, read this book. It's a very brilliant thesis. The man did over 20 years of research on it, based on about 200 years. Glastonbury, of course, a lot of these sites in England and Europe were built on ancient astronomical sites, and we know Glastonbury, there was a zodiac built into the ground. Here's the so-called St. Michael's line in the south of England, and here's all ancient sites along there, which modern churches, the churches of St. Michael, are built onto it. What's interesting is when the sun rises on May Day, that's the line that would be drawn if you could run a shadow all the way along. So the whole thing is, again, tied into a holiday. So, well, May Day, that's not solstice. What difference does that make? Let's go back to some of Kolisko's stuff. Like I say, she did 40 years of this stuff, so she came up with some pretty incredible things. Here was a St. John's Festival, and look at these little interesting patterns that appeared during that festival. Now, I've actually seen these patterns somewhere else, and that was on a foil capacitor. One day we were in our lab in Southern California, and just by chance we were running this Wimhurst machine, and lo and behold, these patterns appeared in the plate, and we were never able to duplicate it. It must have been an opportune alignment or something. There's definite holiday forces working in, and of course here's a classic Easter picture from her gold chloride pictures. This is still silver nitrate, but gold also forms some of the same things. This is like a bud rising from the ground, and of course Easter was tied in. Easter is actually an ancient Egyptian thing, Osiris rising. The Christians just kind of gangstered it and moved along with it because it fit. But actually, there's energies moving. It's not just an inert thing. And this was actually done in 43 because this, Easter is the supposedly the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox. But the spring equinox and the I'm sorry, losing my train of thought here. The spring equinox and the full moon both came on the same day, so the church moved everything ahead a month, said that can't be right. But the royal astronomer said, no, this is the right day here. So Kolisko did her experiments, which she had already gotten these characteristic patterns on Easter. And on the astronomical Easter, they showed up, but on the church Easter, spring was already well in full bloom. It was too late. It was just an average day as far as the Steigbild pictures went. So there's definite forces moving in here. There's more than just calendrical functions. There's this whole kind of geocentric energy happening here. And here's Newgrange, which has a number of very interesting sundials built into it, marking the day out in different divisions. And here's just the alignments from there showing solar and lunar alignments. Again, another major site, megalithic site using. And here's a dolmen distribution in France. Look how many of them there. People don't even realize they actually curve down into Algeria. But again, these are all astronomical sites. Most of them have been turned over, but the ones they know now, they're finding are again, heavens mirrored on Earth. And here's constellation of Virgo, and here are the layout of the Notre Dame cathedrals in France. Not exact, but very, very close. I guess as best as you could get on thing. And of course, we know the sacred geometry of these things. And each of the Notre Dame cathedrals, it's believed, had a special proportion used in it, which was a fraction of its distance from the equator. And each one, so whoever built these things not only knew, that they were master astronomers and master surveyors, they also knew the true size of the Earth and its layout. And this again just shows the harmonic math of the Notre Dame cathedrals. And now that René Le Chateau has now been discovered, there's this whole ground plan built into the ground there. And as far as I know, not too much astronomical work has been done on this yet, but obviously somebody back 800 years ago in France was a master surveyor and really knew what they were doing in laying these things out. And probably can't see it too good, but here's Jerusalem's actually laid out in intertwining pentagrams, which actually center on Golgotha, which was the hill of the crucifixion, the hill of skulls. So even Jerusalem is laid out in the sacred geometry. Angkor Wat, here's Angkor Wat in Asia, Cambodia, and again, astronomical alignments. But not only that, in Angkor Wat, in all of this Asian architecture, they built in the elements. Like we looked at Steiner's ethers earlier, these elements have been very well known through all of this, and it's built all through the sacred architecture of the Orient. In Japan, whoever thought there'd be something on Japan, but there's actually at least a dozen major pyramids on Japan buried under ancient hills. And I've seen some sound readings of some of these, and all the stuff I have on it in Japanese, so it's kind of an emerging thing now, but it's definitely known that somebody was definitely building giant pyramids on Japan. So we see a worldwide network of people that not only mirrored the heavens on the Earth, but could move 200-ton rocks like they were nothing. They knew more about the heavens than we really did because we're really just discovering it. So to me, the ancient astronaut theory doesn't hold water. I think that the sacred traditions of the cosmic forces interacting is much more on point because we can actually see the cosmic forces interacting in the crystallizations of metals and in plants, as we'll see in a moment. But I want to talk about perspective. Here's Ray Palmer's Flying Saucers magazine. Ray Palmer is one of my favorite publishers because he published so much wild stuff. Back in the old days, publisher of Amazing Stories and a number of other ones. But here, this article, How Atlas's Camera Lies to Us. And this was released in the 60s as supposedly showing the curvature of the Earth. But as he actually noted, here's the camera. It didn't show the curvature of the Earth. There's no way. Here's a little section it actually showed. And what you find is that optically you can never see the horizon. If you see railroad tracks going off into the distance, you can never see the curve of the Earth. The optical horizon appears long before the distance allowed, and the curvature will show up. And based on that, here's some diagrams from a man named Cyrus Teed, also known as Koresh, the original Koresh, not the fellow from Waco. This guy lived in the 1800s, from Chicago originally, and here's the eyeball, and here he's basically showing the horizon line. And like if you see a ship going over the horizon, the ship doesn't go down like it's supposed to. It actually disappears, and the horizon kind of disappears with it. So you actually see the ship doesn't go over the horizon. It disappears into the optical horizon. So Koresh, he believed that we lived on the inside of the Earth. And, he was just crazy enough to go and see if we did. So he built this giant surveying transit called rectilineator. And this was actually in newspapers in the United States in the 1890s. I have some of the old clippings. And he put out big calls. He had witnesses, professional people. No scientists would come because they didn't want to believe the guy. But he'd have lawyers and judges and all sorts of business people would sign affidavits. This guy's, equipment was right. He had surveyors, checked it out. What he would do is he would force a mechanical line over a long distance, and here's the supposed curvature of the Earth. So he forced the line, the curve would go off into space. But what happened is, as the line actually ran into the ground, and he performed this experiment along Lake Michigan. He performed it along the Gulf of Mexico. It was performed a number of times over a number of years, and you believe what you want, but nobody's ever proven them wrong, and science is science, and, to me, an experiment stands, even if people don't want to believe it. I've thought about this for 10 years, and I can't figure out how he did it wrong, and I do find it hard to believe, but nonetheless, the experiment stands until somebody can actually refute it scientifically, and now that guy must be crazy, but, yes? Well, you see, he forced a mechanical line along, that's what this thing was for forcing, this is big, like a person would probably stand about this tall. This is probably 8-9 feet tall, and proportionally as long. So he would force a mechanical line using water as a sighting and other surveying transits. So they would make sure that this was level. They had all these levels. This was very, this took quite a bit of time and effort to do. These big wood beams. And wood and steel, I don't know what the entire, sighting line may have been metal. But perfectly straight, yeah. Machined straight. This was to machine grade stuff. These guys weren't just a bunch of kooks trying something out. They were really trying to do a scientific experiment to measure the curvature of the Earth. And their results are that the Earth curved up. And the thing is it's interesting because if you look at projective geometry from space, you cannot tell a difference because of the optical horizon. If space was like this and space didn't have Euclidean properties, which of course relativity doesn't acknowledge Euclidean properties of space anyway. I don't believe in relativity anyway. I go more along with projective geometry, which actually is a bit more profound. Relativity is kind of a distant mirror of the form. But it's mathematically and optically the same when you consider that these would be different densities, that space has qualities and densities that you move through. So the thing is you can believe what you want, but what have you experienced? How many people? Everybody raise your hand. Everybody's been out past Pluto and out seen one of those other stars. Nobody? Okay. Well, we can only speculate, can't we? We can take the best information we can get and try and figure. And I'm a connoisseur of information that doesn't fit the present world picture, so naturally that's what I present as I go along. But let's forget about Koresh, let's go to the scientists. Here we go, anomalous redshifts. Of course, everybody knows redshifts discovered by Hubble. They tell us how far away the galaxies are, how fast the universe is expanding. Wrong. Here's two connected galaxies. One of them's going 8,700 kilometers per second, the other's going 16,900 kilometers per second. And this isn't just one. This guy Halton Arp, who did this, he's cataloged over 200 of these, published a catalog of anomalous galaxies, and was once rated as one of the top 20 astronomers in the world, but now will not be allowed onto any telescope. This is Mount Wilson and stuff he was working at, Mount Palomar, but they just won't let him on. He was told to recant his story, but all he was doing was taking scientific measurements which show that redshifts do not show cosmic distance. So there's another thing about redshifts too. Here's what we call quantized redshifts. Here we see redshifts when they're actually all measured out and categorized out. We've heard about Great Wall of Galaxies. Well, it's actually formed somewhat of a crystalline structure out in space in waves. And what's interesting too is this is one of the problems with redshifts is they're all moving away from Earth. And now that they've actually mapped them out, they're all moving away from Earth in concentric circles, like layers of an onion. So what this actually says, if you read the information and forget about, if Copernicus hadn't come up with this theory and people had measured redshifts, this would be one of their scientific proofs that the Earth is in the center of the universe, because that's what the redshifts tell them. Now redshifts, as we saw, may be much different because of the anomalous redshifts, connected redshifts that don't show the same thing, so we really don't know. What we do know is that we can't believe the picture that science presents to us because there's a lot of problems with it that are swept under the rug. And we showed all this archeoastronomy stuff. I know Bruce Cathie's going to recognize this one here. Bruce Cathie's done a lot of tremendous work, and I didn't want to talk too much about it because he was going to give a talk here. But he talks about how sun angle in relation to Earth grid has a direct effect. And now we saw all these archeoastronomical complexes covering the entire world. Obviously, these people knew that sun angles had something to do with energetic events, from a geocentric point of view. Here is Bruce Cathie's prediction of the times that the French would blow off an atomic bomb at Mururoa Atoll within a couple hours, and he was well within his accuracy. And it's a very fascinating thing that I still find hard to believe, but yet there's some of the evidence. Bruce has done tremendous work on this. I talked to a guy who said, I blew off an atom bomb and out in the Nevada desert, and he said, we didn't check Bruce Cathie's stuff. He said, but we knew about it. But I didn't know if I believed the guy or not, but at least he knew about it, so it shows that they probably did check it. And here's, down here we see morbidity of scarlet fever according to solar waves. People think of diseases as being like spread by little bugs and all that stuff, contagious stuff, but the Soviets have done tremendous work mapping out all these different disease waves, including polio. Interestingly enough, polio was on its way out with the sun cycle when they invented that vaccine, and then there was an upsurge in it, and a lot of people actually got it from the vaccine. But also, this is one of the more interesting things than that, is that here's morbidity of scarlet fever dependent on latitude. Where you are on Earth depends on how much disease you get out of the sun. And of course the viruses are in the same wavelength as ultraviolet light, or similar, so we can, it's very possible that these things are actually forming in weak, bioenergetic fields right within the Earth from solar spray. So, disease may come out of the sun. We talked a bit about, geocentrism. Here's the apparent motion of Mars around the Earth. So here's the Earth in the center, and here's how Mars appears. And here's the solar ring there. And of course, this is one of the problems with the so-called Tychonian view, which was counter to Newton's, was that Mars might run into the sun. But yet, there's plants that actually form according to these patterns on Earth here. The book Cosmological Botany, Planetary Influences upon Plants by Ernst Michael Kranich. Anybody who wants to pursue that, another Steiner scientist. What's interesting, they call it the oppositions. These little loops is when, they only occur though when it's in opposition to the sun, so there never is any chance of Mars running into the sun if there is a geocentric point of view. But interesting enough, here's Jacques Vallée's map of Mars oppositions, which we just saw graphically on the map, along with UFO sightings. All the UFO waves happened when Mars was closest to the Earth on that conjunction. Very interesting. Of course, he thinks that it was because it was easier for him to hop over. You know, might be, you never know. But I'm not a pure geocentrist. I believe that each evolving model contains the previous one. I just don't give up on the previous one. So here we see the Sun, here we see Mars, and here we see Jupiter. And that's actually reflected in the umbellifers, which are plants that branch out and branch out again. That was from World Sightings. That's from Jacques Bally's work. So that was from his work with Hynek when they were graphing and detailing everything. So what we see is the plants form both from heliocentric and geocentric. Both of them affect the life body of the Earth. So which one's right, which one's wrong? They both interpenetrate themselves. The life body responds more to the geocentric point of view. Of course, when you die and your life flashes before your eyes, doesn't matter what scientist told you. What did you experience? You saw the sun come up. You experienced the warmth. These are the things that are going to characterize what you take with you through the duat as you travel on towards your path to immortality. Not what some scientists measured, because there's two forms of measure. The body contains them. There's a measure of the bones. The heart is densest part of the body, which is modern scientific method, but they don't measure with the eyes really, the optical measure. And both of them working together is what the master masons and surveyors who built those astronomical complexes used. Again, here we see the two world views actually competing for each other. Here we see the sun in the center, the Copernican view, and then here's the Tychonian view. This is old engraving from the period when people were trying to sort this out. And of course, here's the discarded old Ptolemaic view down there. So really, they're both true. Both of them, this one here has profound effect on the life body of the Earth. This is the one, I call it the lowest common denominator. People say it's Occam's razor, it's the most logical, but it's really Occam's razor doesn't always work. All it is it's the lowest common denominator mathematically, and it explains some things, but doesn't explain the energetic events happening in life body on the Earth. And here we have a Tibetan mandala, schematic diagram of the basic mandala of consciousness. And the reason I'm bringing this out is because here we have, in this section, it's blue, yellow, red, and green. And what this is, blue is the sun rising, yellow is the sun overhead, red is the sun setting, and green is the nighttime. And the whole mandala of consciousness of the Tibetans is based on their direct experience of the sun going around the Earth. That is their religion, philosophy, and pathway, which they teach. The Tibetan Book of the Dead is nothing more than understanding the energetic imprints of your energy body. And this is one of the diagrams of how they map that out. So experience is geocentric. And actually, geocentric is the wrong word. Rudolf Steiner called his science anthroposophy. Anthropocentric. We are the center. People say, oh, that's all egotistical, but hey, that's all I got is my ego. I don't care what other people think. I got to live with what I'm thinking. And here again is the Earth. Here's and we see the metals lined up according to their planetary alignments, planetary correspondences, and luster and mobility, from lead to silver. And of course, in this they use solidified mercury. This comes from Rudolf Hauschka's work. Rudolf Hauschka was the founder of Walla Pharmaceuticals, and I'm sure many people up here have heard of Hauschka Cosmetics and stuff. He was a great chemist and dye master, but wrote a number of brilliant books on geocentric activities of metals and minerals. And here's how he showed the different mineral impulses actually come into the plants when the sun's in different parts of the zodiac. And this was done over several decades, where they would grow sprouts for 3 days in hermetically sealed hermetically sealed silver containers, actually platinum containers, with triple distilled water, and they would sprout seeds for 3 days. And of course, these things were going all the time, like these crystallizations. After 3 days, they would open up, weigh them, then they would burn them into a mineral constituency of the ash. And they would graph this out over decades. And what they found is each year, definitely different mineral impulses came in when the sun was in different parts of the zodiac. And these graphs exist there if anybody wants to go check them out. So again, if the Earth is it's the third rock from the sun, how come all this stuff is happening here? I've seen pyramids on Mars, but I've never been there. I don't know what's happening there. The universe may act differently. We don't know how things are going. All we know is what's here. We have to, before we can start thinking how everything's going everywhere else, if you don't know half this stuff's going on here, how can you really decide what's happening? Because most of it's extrapolation. The classic picture, you recognize this one, Jonathan? Atlas carrying the world. What does this represent? This represents nothing more than the human being the center of the inflow of all the cosmic energies. The zodiac, the stellar energies. That's the true representation. And it is a lot to bear sometimes. And here's another way of viewing the universe, just kind of the cosmic harmonies with the Earth down at the bottom and the sun there. And this comes from Flood, Robert Flood, an alchemist. Just look at some different worldviews here. Here's the tree of life of the Kabbalists. Down here we have the Earth. Here we have the Moon. Here we have the Sun. Here's Venus, Mercury, Mars, Jupiter. There's different things, zodiac. We'll call these, this is supposedly the triad, which in Christian religion is, the three boys in the sky. And it's differently in different religions. Father, Son, Holy Ghost. Vishnu, Brahma, Shiva. It appears in many religions. All of them deriving from pure cosmic archetypes. Here we have the sun. Again, we looked at Tibetan mandala. Here we see it in expression. Here's the sun in the middle, and we see the four stages moving around. And here we see the Earth, and we see the actual, the moon actually moves around the Earth, creating time. And it's interesting, in Steiner's geological lectures, he talked about how the sun came out of the Earth like during the Paleozoic period, and then the moon came out later during the Mesozoic period. And he said, time as we knew it didn't begin, because our time cycles, all our circadian rhythms and things are based on the moon. And like Riley Crabb said, to travel to the moon, physically you got dragged along that path, and there was a concomitant raise in consciousness. But whether we went to the moon or not is a big question, and I think that's one of the reasons that consciousness, at the same time when you can find some of the finest information on Earth, you can find also some of the most degenerate people that have ever been here too. So it's a real mixed bag. But this is ancient Jewish way of looking at the universe, modified through medieval Western tradition. And here's the Tree of Life laid out on the map of Africa. Mecca, Khartoum, Zimbabwe. Interestingly enough, Giza is actually in a place which doesn't exist on this tree. A place called Geothe, or knowledge, which is like a hole to the other side, which sort of proper Kabbalists never talked about that stuff in the older books, but more modern books have delved into a bit. But that represented knowledge and the gateway to the other worlds. And where is that? Giza, where all this worldwide stuff kind of focused in and connected to Sirius, the sun beyond the sun. And, I'm sorry, going the wrong way here. And here's a representation of the Tree of Life with its backside, its reflection showing. Basically, I think you can travel through the world two ways. Into the universe, you can get in a tin can and be catapulted and take however much time they've calculated out to do that. Or you could use more advanced technology and maybe make it faster. Philo Farnsworth, who invented electronic television, also invented nuclear fusion, working in 1963 at ITT Farnsworth Labs in Indiana. IT&T shut them down as soon as they got working. But Farnsworth's wife is a good friend of mine, and she told me, he said before he died, he was going to take her to another planet, another star system. And she said, well, how can you do that? It takes all these light years. He said, oh, no. He said, there's no space in between. Because he knew, actually, and of course that's why IT&T shut them down. They were too busy making Wonder Bread and toppling governments. And I don't think you had Wonder Bread here in New Zealand, this kind of puffy white stuff. Say, helps build bodies 12 ways. You say, yeah, out this way and out that way. Some funny stuff. And here's another Tree of Life I found in a Occult magazine in the 1980s, which is it's a hollow earth Tree of Life, where here's the Earth again, and here's the Tree of Life coming down. Here's the sun and the different layers, the Earth layer. But interestingly enough, they have the interior of the Earth, the hollow Earth, and the interior sun is actually listed as orgone layer. So the Earth is actually acting like an orgone accumulator, and a lot of stories of the inner Earth were that it's like this bluish silver sun in the center, which would mark the optical characteristics of orgone perfectly. So who knows? It's just another view of a person that felt they had a flash of insight at the time. And here, everybody likes grays. Many people don't know. Here's one of the first grays that came through. Aleister Crowley, a magician at the beginning of this century. This was the extraterrestrial he was in contact with, kind of the precursor to the whole modern extraterrestrial contact age. And his name meant the way through to the other worlds. So, and here's a shamanic picture from Siberia, which is actually a shamanic map to get to the other planets. They traveled on those lines at certain times of year. They didn't need any metallic craft. Their consciousness could transfer, just like the Kachinas would show up in the Hopi Kivas. The shamans have always known this. They can travel along these pathways. And here's modern Taoist view. Taoist tradition goes back 5,000 years, but it's finally coming out to where people can get detailed information. And of course, they basically connect up, to stellar space. And they say people in southern hemisphere, connect up to the Southern Cross. What's interesting about those shamanic pathways, because a lot of people, about the Kaikoura sightings off the coast down here. And many years ago, I read Quentin Fogarty's book, Let's Hope They're Friendly. Very interesting, sober book. Tells the whole story, how he went and filmed them and how he was ridiculed and it ruined his life just because he filmed them. But there's one very curious passage in the book that to me was the most profound thing said in it. And just near the end of the book, he gives his own impressions. He said, he had the strangest feeling that these UFOs were collecting souls of the dead. Now we go to the American Thunderbirds. That's what the American Thunderbirds did. I was traveling around Indian reservations years ago with the Northern Cheyenne warrior, and I kept asking him about, caves and UFOs and things. And he's going, look, he said, I can't really talk about this stuff. That's my religion. He said, but I'll tell you one thing. He says, we see the Thunderbirds. He said, but we see them over the burial grounds. That's where they come. He said, because that's, they take us to the other world. That's our transport. So what is what are the heavens? Is it just a bunch of chunks of rock up there that we can fly out to, go find a bar to have, some kind of curious beer over on this one star here? Or is it like all the ancient peoples before us believed, and which we don't believe because we build everything out of harmony with the universe, that where we are is more important than where we're going? What we take in and what we do, the golden rule is what rules our life. As above, so below. Heavens are mirrored in us. If we don't mirror them back, we're never going to get anywhere out here. So, thank you for your time.
Hello. If you have any questions, we have about 15 minutes where Tom would be more than delighted to entertain some questions, and then we'll have a lunch break, eh? And Harvey Cook will be... yes, that's right, I did. We're going real informally. So if you have any questions, direct them at Tom, and then we'll take a break.
Yes.
You have that picture of the Nexus magazine, the actual famous one. The Nexus magazine, the tallest craft on the Herald, the main...
Right, yeah, I do have that, because he took that out of Renee's book, NASA Moon America.
You didn't trust that?
No, I didn't. I just had to, I have 3,000 slides along these lines. It's kind of hard to fit in even what I wanted to get through here. So, yes. Yeah, if you're interested in it, I can direct you to the book that they came out from. Definitely. Yes. The question is, do I genuinely believe there's been any moon landings? Well, obviously something's happening on the moon. I honestly don't know. It's very possible. The thing is the information's so mixed up, I couldn't give you a definite answer. I could say yes, I do believe it, but you know, wars have been fought over what people believed and they've been wrong. So belief is a function of consciousness, which unfortunately disrupts the path for knowledge. So I tried not to believe too much, except to put myself in certain reference frames to understand things. Right, Capricorn 1, that was a movie. Well, oftentimes they make movies like that, so people, oh, they never went to the moon, they go, oh, you're thinking about that crazy Capricorn 1 movie. They always put some of the best news in the crazy tabloids, because they know once it's in there, nobody's going to believe it, even if it's true. Yes? Oh, definitely. I'm very interested in those redshifts and anomalies. Oh, definitely. A good friend of mine, Peter Lindemann, a well-known free energy researcher in America, has written some very excellent articles on thermodynamics and free energy. Sure, I'd consider it. Yeah. Let me get some, yes. It's a very complex. It represents basically the Earth and where it stands. It's an archetypal structure in many ways. It represents a lot of things, but fundamentally the Earth and the Earth-Moon connection mathematically, you know, a geodetic marker. But it's a very complex thing. There's not just one simple answer to that question. Yes? No, I can't. If I saw it, I might. But there's been a lot of interesting stuff seen around the moon. Yes. Which charge plate? Oh, that was just a basic Edmund Scientific Company Wimshurst generator. He has electrostatic volts. I don't recall the reading. It's 10 years ago that happened. Yes? I don't know. I haven't been in touch with him for almost 10 years. I honestly don't know. You could call Directory Assistance in Michigan. Give it a try. Cyrus Teed, C-Y-R-U-S-T-E-E-D. His book, The Cellular Cosmogony, has been reprinted by Borderlands for people that want to review his scientific experiments. Yes? Yeah, I'm a little suspicious of a lot of this stuff. You know, the problem with things like the Hale-Bopp is people, say a little information is dangerous. Well, Hale-Bopp's like a classic example. You know, some guy went and figured his star chart wrong and then thought some object was following Hale-Bopp, and it was only a star, and yet the internet was clogged for days with people geeking out over wrong information. So it was an interesting comet. All comets are interesting. There's a lot more to them than I think, because even like the Great Chicago Fire was caused by a Earth passing through the tail of a comet. Old friend of mine, Vince Gaddis, discovered that in his research many years ago. So, and also disease waves have been tied to cometary tails. So it's a astronomical bit of detective work. You have to read his book, Mysterious Fires and Lights. Yes. Yeah, they might have been. You know, I don't really know. I wouldn't discount it. You know, I don't have enough information to know. It's very possible that they had working flying saucers back in those days. So, you know, why not? Well, that's a good question. It is a very good question. Maybe they used UFOs. You know, maybe they didn't use these rockets like they were. So, you know, NASA may have gone. It's just these photos really bear a lot of the earmarks of fakery. And I know it's hard to believe, because I would defend those to death 10 years ago, you know, because I thought that there was alien bases on the moon, and that was the whole cover-up. And I even show little earmarks in them to show that there was activity in the background, like the giant rolling boulder on Mount Hadley. But yet now... NASA, they're NASA slides. From NASA, they're in the NASA slide carrier. They are NASA slides. Right. No, but I've been over a lot of that through National Geographic's actually some of the best, even though it is, you know, dot printing and stuff. You can still see, like in Crater Kepler. I think Crater Kepler in the September 1969, National Geographic, which was one of the moon landings, they showed a picture of Crater Kepler, the one I showed, but right up close. And you can see that there's definite antenna structures and stuff in there. So my feeling always was that they went to the moon and they found UFOs. But now that I've really kind of gone over these photos for the last couple of years, I'm inclined. And if you can convince me they're real, I'm just having a little bit of difficulty with that idea right now, because you know, there's so much drop-off of the light, and you really can't see. You know, on one, the shadow goes two different ways around the boulder, so they had... All right, now I've got extensive graphic stuff on my thing too, you know, I can... Right.
Long time ago. Back on my first book, my book 20 years ago, NASA was doing at that time, making talking space and this kind of stuff. So my concern is with any photographic evidence, you know, is it real?
Right. Well, the thing is, I'm sure if they were going to fake it these days, the stuff would look a lot better. No doubt about it. Which makes me dubious of everything these days. You know, it's kind of like more and more stuff comes out, like the Roswell stuff. You know, I mean, I got to admit, I'll raise my hand. I don't believe that stuff. You know, I think the information just gets too good every year as the technology gets better to fake it. And it's probably not a popular opinion here, so we won't talk about it. But that's just my opinion. You know, it's just too easy to fake, so I have no way of judging. So I have to assume it's fake until I have any evidence that it's real. Yeah, that's the best way to go. Yeah. Yes. No, the science of archeoastronomy is a very precise science. They've been able, like the Sphinx is dated, you know, 2500 BC by standard archaeologists. It's now been dated archeoastronomically to 10,500 BC because of the precision of that science. And of course, the people who figured that out aren't allowed, they can't get research visas anymore in Egypt. John Anthony West and his crew, they've been kicked off because the answer they came up with is politically incorrect. But archaeoastronomy is a very precise science. You know, because a lot of these things, like I showed medicine wheels and stuff, these things can be dated by what's called the helical rising of stars. And the helical risings of stars change through a 25,000-year precession of the equinoxes. So they can actually date these things very precisely to, you know, usually within 100 years or so over millennia. So, yeah.
You mentioned, you said that when they blew the space shuttle up in 1986, can you tell me what you think was behind that story?
Sure, that's prevented civilians from going into space. Because there's a lot of interesting things with that, like the Russians, who always had their trawlers out there watching every lunar shot. You know, from when they started them, they pulled them all back about 3 hours beforehand because they would have been right in the area where the thing crashed. Which is what some people had used as proof that the Russians had supposedly did it, but I think that NASA actually did it themselves.
Well, it failed because of the O-ring.
Well, that was the Lee Harvey Oswald of the engineering program there. You know, we don't know if the O-ring... These guys are, you know, shooting all this stuff up in space. How do we know one little ring failed? We don't know. That's what they told us. Right, they may have... Well, that's again what part of the story that they told us. We don't really know. But what... Well, because there was the first civilian going into space. You know, it's kind of like people thinking, yeah, everybody can start going into space, but the whole thing is like I couldn't even get a straight answer from NASA whether you can see the stars or not. And if you read what all the astronauts say, everyone tells you something different. Like Mike Collins, when he was doing his spacewalk. Oh, the stars are just incredible. I'm cartwheeling through the stars. Yet, but when he's going to the moon, gee, space is all black, you know. And which is it? Can you see him? Can't you see him? And when Jonathan and I interviewed Gordon Cooper, I brought that up to him. I read, you know, Mike Collins' quotes. He said, well, that's because, you know, when you're on the dark side of this, you know, of the Earth, you can see him. And I went and checked after the interview. I found out that Collins was in the sunlight when he claimed he saw him. So it caught Gordon Cooper, actually caught him on a couple things, but having to do with thermal problems in space and things and optics. But the main point is you figure these guys have been going up 30 years. Okay, what do the stars look like? You think it'd be like a very simple question. Okay, here's a picture. This is what they look like. You know, but even the Hubble, you know, Hubble's an imager. You know, it has a mirror, you know, because we have no problem. So secondary light sources, you know, we see like sun reflecting off of things. In fact, the man who developed photographs for 30 years there told me, they said, well, these guys were ordered not to look at the sun because obviously they get blinded. He said, but of course, I said, well, obviously, you know, they're up there in this little tin can, they're going to look out at the sun. What's the story? And he said, well, one of the astronauts, and I forget which one, told him, he said it was weird that he felt like when he was looking at the sun, it looked kind of like a reddish, dull orb kind of behind on the mirror, on the window. It looked as though the sun was imaging on the window, and he could see like a shadow of this like reddish orb behind it, which is very interesting. So that the actual, you know, photosphere of the sun appearing was actually when it was striking the glass. Now, what this guy told me was that it was a real puzzle. Like when I sent Alan Shepard up, no stars. I went, gee, what's going on here? So he told me that they started developing I've never seen this information come out anywhere. They started developing diffraction gratings. And he said with the diffraction gratings that they were starting to put on the helmets, they could start seeing some of the lower order star sources, or the higher order, you know, some of the brighter stars. They could just start seeing a couple of them with it. So my only speculation is like when John Bartow went up and claims he saw they were brighter in the sky than they were on Earth, I can only assume that either A, he's lying, which he probably wasn't, or B, they had, you know, perfected these diffraction gratings so that people could see. He was on the first Challenger flight, because that was the second or third Challenger flight that blew up. Okay, yeah, I'll be around all day if anybody has any.
We'll do it better than that. We're going to, we're going to do that this evening before after Stan's talk, which is at 6:30. I hate to cut this Q&A short, but we're trying to juggle a lot of needs here and a lot of scheduling problems. But Tom will be back tonight. Right now we're going to have a lunch break. I would really appreciate if everybody could be back promptly at 1 o'clock. What's going to happen then is we're going to see the half-hour wrap-up from the Mexican 60 Minutes. Then Harvey Cook will be speaking for an hour, and then David Icke. So have a good lunch, and we will see you soon. Thank you.